Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, a legend, one of my favorite guitar players ever, from Richard Hell and the Voidoids and so much more, the great Ivan Julian is on the show today, and he has a brand new fantastic solo record called Swing Your Lanterns, available everywhere now. We'll talk about all this in 1 second. But first, if you want to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham, and he will get the message to me. You can also find the show on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook. I think that's it. That's an Instagram, right? Okay, anyway, all those are at Turned Out a Punk on those platforms. YouTube? Does it say YouTube? Anyway, I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at LeftForDamian, or whatever Twitter is now called. If you want to support the show, tell all your friends about this podcast. Let them all know that we have this podcast here that we do each and every week, and hopefully you enjoy it too. I play in a band. We are called Fucked Up. We are going to be going on tour with The Damned. That's right. One of the greatest bands of all time. The Damned, with a bunch of dates across the East Coast of the United States. And then we're going to Europe and playing some shows with Off and some other bands over there. It's going to be a fun time. Dinosaur Jr., Bob Mould. We're playing some fun shows over there. You can find out more information over at fuckedup.cc. We also have some records and t-shirts, and thank you for supporting that band, because that supports me, and it is very appreciated. All right, on to today's show. Today on the show, as I said off the top, the great, my favorite guitarist ever, one half of the greatest guitar duo in punk, in my opinion, from Richard Hell and the Voidoids, the great Ivan Julian is on the show. This is someone who I've wanted to talk to for a very long time. This goes a lot of cool places. There's a lot of reveals, big reveals in this one, and I am very excited for you to hear it. Also, I'm very excited for you to hear Swing Your Lantern, the solo album I also mentioned off the top by Ivan Julian, a fantastic record featuring members of Hunks and His Punks and other people, as you'll hear in this episode we talk about. And that can be heard anywhere and everywhere. You can also find out more dates for Ivan Julian over at ivanjulian.com. He's going to be playing some dates in the Massachusetts area coming up real soon, and as well as some other stuff. Keep up to date with all things Ivan Julian over there. Well, I don't think I got much to ramble on about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Ivan Julian on Turned Out a Punk. Ivan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to meet you.
It's a huge thrill for me. As I was telling you off air awkwardly, you are my guitar hero. You're the person that I think you and Robert forever changed the way people approach the instrument. And I think the stuff you guys did and the stuff you continue to do, I love your new record. Like, I think there's some great songs on it. And like, I think Tell Me Lies is like one of my favorite songs of the year. And, you know, you're still doing it, but like, I think you just changed that instrument forever. But this is one I've really looked forward to doing.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Well, I got to start them off the way they all start off, which is, Ivan, how'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
It was just a music form. It was, you know, I mean, it was where we were at the time as a musical culture, because I'd come to New York from Europe, because I went to Europe first to find bands there. And everyone was talking about New York City and this place, CBGB's, and this place where bands could play their own original music and not play covers. And the backdrop for that was the corporate labels were putting out all these cookie cutter, like, you know, kind of cutesy bands with no songs and no meaning or no anything, and everybody was thirsty for something that was like real. So when I came here, I mean, I happed upon Richard and Bob, Robert, and Mark, and they here being New York City, they were part of this whole scene where people were actually able to play their own music. I mean, that Hilly provided at CBGB's, So I mean, I lunged at it. The reason I came here, and I was in a band called the Foundations. And they weren't writing. They were, they'd done it. They were just playing supper clubs and theaters, and I was young and I wanted to write and I wanted to be part of a band that was actually saying something. So that's kind of how I kind of got into it.
So going back before that, you kind of grew up in like the Maryland, D.C. area, right?
My father was, like in the Navy, so I spent a good part of my time in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, where they're keeping all the prisoners now. I know exactly where that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but then when I think about 11 or 12, we moved back. They moved back. I've been there since I was like 4 or 5. So when I moved to the States. So they're, yeah, in the Maryland, D.C. area. Exactly. Yeah.
That's kind of like prime, the music discovering age, it seems to be. Certainly from doing the show for myself, like 11, 12, 13. That's like when you're really kind of picking up on rock and roll, or at least discovering your own kind of music.
Exactly, exactly. It's so true. And then also, if you're lucky enough, you're getting turned on by people's older brothers and sisters and all this other stuff, and you're hearing stuff that really makes your ears and your heart react, you know?
So who were some of the early bands that you were kind of gravitating towards at that time? When you get to kind of DC that age?
You mean on the radio or locally?
Just like whatever, like yeah, whatever you were picking up on, like certainly on the radio, but was there kind of local stuff happening around that time?
No, once again, I mean, everyone was in a cover band. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no a place where you could play your own original band. And if you aspired to be a musician, that was your goal to like have, a residency at some place and play either all Stones songs or all Beatles songs or something like that. But I did hook up, I mean, locally because him and I grew up together with Ted Nicely, and he was in a band called
Absolutely. Tommy Keene, it
Keen.
produced Fugazi.
Yeah, exactly. Bob Baram, the guitar player, all those guys. I mean, yeah, I mean, actually, here's an interesting fact. Ted Nicely and HR from Bad Brains and I all went to the same high school together.
Wow. So you knew HR in high school?
Yeah. I mean, Ted was a senior, so he was only there 1 year while we were there. I was a junior, and then HR was a sophomore.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wild.
We all met in the woods one day to smoke a hash oil joint or something like that. I mean, that isn't where I met Ted, but that's where I met HR.
That's awesome. It's so amazing to kind of look at that period, like those three names that you say there. It's obvious, like yourself included. It's like music legends, people that would change kind of music. I'm a huge Raz fan. Like I'm a ginormous power pop person. So Tommy Keene is like rest in peace,
Yeah,
a legend to me.
yeah, exactly. He's totally great. Yeah, and really, really smart guy as well. And and then there's Mike Reedy. I mean, the Raz. I mean, they were a cover band when they started, but they were a really good cover band. They really pulled off the whole like late '60s Stones thing. And Ratty was great. I mean, of course, and you know of Abad Baram, right?
Pardon me?
You know the name Abad Baram.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He was in the band as well.
Oh, yeah.
He changed my way of playing. If I have a mentor, it's him. He totally changed my way of playing because I was way into the Stones, and he had come here from India and like kind of got exposed to like a lot of the B-sides and all the stuff that we didn't get to exposed to in America. So I'm learning to play the guitar. I'm a teenager, and he's almost slapping my hand, going, "No, not like that." Yep. You got to do it like this. You got to get in and like, yeah, he was great, and I owe him a lot. Yeah.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's so. I guess like at that time, were you guys aware of like George Brigman? Because he would do that record Jungle Rot in '75. That's just like it's like weirdly. It sounds like punk. It would have fit in and kind of like the punk scene a couple years later, certainly in New York.
Yes, I left town by then, so I mean everything kind of happened after I left. I
Mhm.
mean the go-go scene, the whole thing. DC all of a sudden became this musically viable place. I mean, but that's the reason I left because it wasn't when I was there. But yeah, a lot of things happened then. Yeah.
So your cover band was a Led Zeppelin cover band.
Well, I had that with Ted Nicely. Yeah,
Did
Ted
did you
Nicely.
sing?
Yeah, I sang, and then Ted fired me. They fired me because my voice changed when I was 13.
Um, so what made you kind of like pick up and leave for England?
I realized I just didn't have a future there. Plus I'd gotten this gig with this law firm as a kind of a paralegal coming up to New York and doing research. And I, would come up and spend the night in New York City. They gave me money for a hotel, but I would just kind of wander around all night and go to Max's and places like that. And I wanted to be in a city that was like, creatively viable. I mean, like, more than just one dimensional, because there's, very few industries in Washington. I mean, either you work for the government or you work for somebody that works for the government. It's like that's your future there.
Mhm.
And I wanted something different. So, with that influence from New York, I just decided one day, okay, I'm going to save some money and I'm going to get a one-way ticket to England. So that's what I did.
So did you see anyone like play Maxes back then? Like what like it would have been the Dolls and maybe Suicide and Stilettos, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see them. I mean, because um, I didn't see them play because I would just kind of pop in, and I actually, wasn't even really aware of the bands upstairs. I was aware of the back room and the ground floor, and I would see Johnny there a lot, though,
Hmm.
and it's one thing that made me decide at the time I couldn't move to New York City because Johnny, I'd just seen him on TV on was it David Suskind show or one of those shows, like the big rock star and his groupie Sable Star and like this that. And then I went to New York and he's there in Union Square like freezing without a guitar case and without a coat. And I went, man, that is a brutal place. You're on TV and then you're like freezing out in the cold. Like I don't know if I can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess London of the late '70s, the only place it looks better than is New York.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So what was it like arriving in London around that time? Like was it immediately that you got into Foundations or were you kind of like trying out for other groups before that?
Um. I looked at it as my job. I went around to all the clubs like Town and Country and all those pubs where bands played and just kind of sussed out what was happening, like who was
Hmm.
playing what. And it took me a month to find a band, to find the Foundations. And how I did it was these people asked me, like, what are you doing here? So I'm looking for a band. So they said, okay, we're going to take you to this rehearsal studio called Manny's Rehearsal Studio near World's End. And he said, and I walked in and I met Manny, and Manny was a really nice guy. And he said, "Okay, just sit here, and somebody will need a guitar player." And that's exactly what happened. I paid my rent in scones. I would buy him scones every day, so I would be offering something. And in that time, I met Topper Headon because Topper was playing with a guy called Gary Moore, the blues guitar.
Oh, wow, so what was like was he like kind of on the circuit as well that you guys were playing in or is it a separate circuit that you just met him through like
Separate circuit. I don't know if you could call them circuits back then. Yeah, it was definitely a separate circuit because the Foundations were doing something entirely different.
Mhm.
But I mean, then again, all musicians, of course, like when we meet, we talk, Topper and I had a couple of great conversations because he was rehearsing there with Gary, and I was just hanging out, just trying to find something.
Do you see like Hawkwind or the Pink Fairies or any of that sort of proto-punk stuff that would have been I guess happening too?
Names, but no, I didn't. No, I didn't. Because once I did join the Foundations, it was like, it was a brutal touring schedule. I mean, those guys, there were times when we had two gigs in separate cities in the same day. They'd have the equipment set up in one, and we go to the other. I mean, I remember like coming back home to London and like finally thinking, oh God, I can get some rest. It was 5 in the morning. Okay, 5:36. The phone rings. It's Colin going, "Hey man, you still sleeping?" I'm like, "Am I still sleeping? What do you mean?" He goes, "No, we got to go." Blah blah blah. Like that's what they did constantly. It was a good good 101. It was a good yeah.
That's like the British way of touring, where they like have two shows in one day because the drives are so short. They're like, oh, it's no big deal. But if you're up on stage, it's a big deal.
Well, especially when you have been going for 9 or 10 days or something like that. I
Yeah.
mean, luckily, not always, but on those days, so I think they had someone to haul the gear, So I mean, and it was all set up and everything. But yeah, that was really educational. Playing the what were called the labor clubs, that were up north. Whereas, like the moment you would start playing, then all the people in the town would start fighting each other, like throwing bottles at each other, and I literally did play a place with chicken wire in front. I thought this was just a myth, but like there's chicken wire in front of the stage. Yeah, it's pretty wild. You know,
Yeah,
'Cause
well, it's such a hard drinking bar culture there, and I could only imagine what those working man's club type things shows would have been like back then, where it's just dudes that want to scrap. It's still like that when we start going over there in like the early 2000s.
yeah, I'm sure. And I mean, when you go up north, right, to some of the labor towns, right?
Well, you know what? It's weird. I found most of the stuff that we've ever had was been in the South, but it's just I think it's like the idea of like drinking snake bites or Red Bulls and booze. Like it's all this stuff that's like highly caffeinated and like alcohol mixed together, so you just have this sort of like cocktail for violence.
Well, yeah, added to the fact that like you've been working this hard like crap job all week that's really physical, and you need some way to vent something, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're just as crazy as the men, if not more, you know.
That's why they need to legalize cannabis and just make them all cannabis works clubs, and then everyone can just chill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, much less strenuous, and like less dangerous as well.
So, did you immediately go from? Oh, actually, no. Did you go to Europe at all on tour? Like mainland Europe, I mean.
Yeah, yeah. We went to France. We went to what was then Yugoslavia, or Croatia and Macedonia and all that. Yeah.
What was it? What were those shows like?
Well, it was great because it made me realize how I mean, this might sound corny, but it's true. It's like music really does unite people, you
Mm.
know? I mean, I would have conversations or musical conversations with people and some of the other bands over there, especially it's one band called Parne Valyak, which translates into steamroller. And I mean, we would find songs that we knew in common and stuff like that, and play them for each other. It's like it made me really appreciate what we do.
Well, how they would they have been familiar with the foundations because of like BBC World Service and stuff like that? Like, how familiar were they with the music, or was it just because here comes a group from kind of outside?
No,
Would you
they
say?
were. That's what kind of surprised me. They were very familiar with just about everything, and some of them were really astute about bands and from England and the U.S. at
Mm.
the time. I mean, and maybe because I have to admit I kind of was brainwashed to some degree that like I thought they would just all be like Eastern Bloc people like with sacks on their back singing Volga Boatman. I mean, I thought like there was like no kind of enlightenment at all, and I was like so completely wrong about that.
Well, it's interesting because that's like and being a product of like '80s American pop culture in Canada. You even have this where it's sort of like that's the perception that's kind of put on you to outside these people and turn them into, I guess at that point, like an enemy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I like kind of went like going over there on tour that like was kind of the end of all my stereotypes. And you're like, oh yeah, no one likes their government.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so true. Once again, yes. I mean, it's everyone's posed as the enemy, the them, and all that, and it's not just not true when you talk to the people.
Absolutely. So, do you go back so did you go to New York immediately, or did you go back to DC, or where'd you kind of go after your time over there?
Well, I had a friend that I worked at the law firm with, and unfortunately for him, he said, "If you ever need a place to stay, write me." And so when I was in, I think it was in Macedonia somewhere, and I wrote him a letter saying, "Listen, I'm coming to New York. I need a place to stay," and that was that. And I mean, and he accommodated me for a while.
What year did you get to New York?
This would have been 75, I think. Yeah.
So, yeah, getting to New York at that point, like, could you perceive like what was happening already? Like, did you go to CB's or back to Max's before kind of linking up with the band?
No, I mean, what happened was there was this paper here, this trade paper called Musicians Classified that was kind of like the Musicians Village Voice, like ads for amps and also people that needed work and stuff like that. So I found out about this. I put an ad in, and then I did go down and see my folks for like a month or so. Came back when the ad came out, and on the front of that paper was an article about Richard. Okay, and in the back of the paper was my ad. So, I mean, I read about Richard. I mean, just kind of skimmed over it, like, downtown poet, blah, 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 like playing at CBGB's. And I'd heard of CBGB's, but I wasn't, it wasn't really a scene yet. It was just a place where people played, where Hilly allowed Patty and Richard and people like that to perform there. And then there was a pool table, like, right next to the stage. It was just like, it wasn't like the CB's that it became later. It was just like, so the guys at the pool table would yell at you for playing too loud. That kind of.
I heard it had a terrible smell. When Jane County was on the show, she said it smelled. There was like Healy's dog was crapping on the floor, and they were cooking chili at the same time, and it made for quite the aroma.
That's really funny you say that. Well, I mean, it was partially the dog crap, but it got cleaned up fairly regularly. But it was also just like, the smell of old wood and beer, but old wood and Budweiser. Like just kind of permeated everything. I mean, and you add the dog shit to that, and actually, and Hilly's, unlike the movie, the CBGB's movie that you hear about or you see, and I only saw this one blurb on it. Where he's there in this brightly lit kitchen and he's got this big shiny silver kettle where he's making chili. I have Hilly's chili pot. Okay,
You do?
he gave it to me because Hilly would cook his chili in a cast iron pan, back in this dark room. And, we were all kind of hungry slash starving at the time. So if he offered you chili for 50 cents, you want whatever he charged for it, I forget. Like, yeah, sure. You didn't think about what was crawling around there or anything like that. One day I went in and I asked for chili, and Hilly goes, "No, I can't do that." I go, "Well, what's wrong?" He goes, "The health department shut me down." I said, "Like, I can't make chili anymore." So I looked over at the crusty frying pan. I said, "Can I have your frying pan?" He gave
Well,
me the frying pan.
I wanted to know, like, could you perceive what like a tide change this thing was? Like, obviously grabbing that frying pan, like, were you doing it for sentimental reasons, or was it part of this idea that, like, because this is such a seismic shift in music that's happening around you. Like, that's what I love about, punk, is the fact that all these groups that don't sound anything like each other are all finding the freedom to make this like new sound at the same time. Like, did you pick up on what a moment this was?
Well, later, I mean, to answer your frying pan question, I needed a frying pan. I mean, there was no, I mean, but then again, as things progress. I mean, if you read especially about like the bebop period and the jazz period in the 40s and 50s, it was much like that, where all these people from different parts of the country had gravitated to New York and started to create the sound. It was very much like that. And I remember thinking, like, I was walking up to CB's one day, and I went, people are going to remember this place. I don't know why, but there's something happening here. Like, it's something I always wanted as well. It's like I wanted to live in a town where every night I could go out and see different bands and see music. And this was like 2 blocks away from me, and I could just, and like I said, they were all the genres were so incredibly diverse. I mean, that's why some people say, "Oh, punk rock, blah 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 blah." Eighth Notes. There were so many different kinds of bands there, like all having this edge and doing their own thing.
Yeah, like it feels eventually it does kind of get codified, but like it's almost like this return to what made rock music, pop music great, and that's like the unifier.
Yeah, and that's what was needed at the time. Because I said, I mean, anything else that was coming out on the radio, people were just bored with. So when people got wind of like and you have to give some credit to some of the radio stations, like, believe it or not, WPIX, which is now a news channel in New York, started to play some of this stuff, and people just ate it up. So yeah, I mean, it was something that came along at the right time that people needed. Just like, I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about the Seattle scene and all that. It's like things kind of loop back full circle to like its visceral essence. I mean, I'm hoping for that again.
Yeah, like it's interesting to there's stuff that's happening now but I just think the idea of a geographically localized scene, I just don't know how that happens again in the same sort of way. Like, where would be as affordable to get 50-cent chili, no matter how unhealthy it may have been, but like it just
Yeah,
doesn't exist anymore. That kind of like failed city that New York kind of was during that point, it seems.
exactly. Which was a perfect for a 19, 20-year-old to exist.
Yeah.
Kids come up and ask me like, "How did you guys do it?" And I said, "Well, the rent was $125 a month. I mean, even though, with inflation and everything, it was still $125, not several thousand, So, I mean, and I mean, I don't know how you guys do it, how you're able to, like, exist here and try to make music when everything is so incredibly expensive.
Well, Toronto's, I guess, a little bit more affordable than New York, but not much. And I think there's all these things that I feel like we were like one of the last bands through a closing door.
Yeah.
Having a practice space. Who's going to have rooms for rent to allow people to make music when there's, people are willing to pay for those to live in and pay, 10 times the rent, 12 times the rent.
Yeah, and complain all the time. Yes.
Had you heard like the MC5 and the Velvet Underground and the New York, sorry, New York Dolls, I know you were familiar with, but I mean, like, had you heard like the MC5 stuff or the Stooges or any of those bands, the Velvets?
Not so much the Velvets for some reason. I mean, of course, Lou Reed had that big hit, Wild Side. Not so much. I mean, I mean that was him, but I did hear MC5. I mean, in DC, I heard MC5, and I heard, of course, Iggy's album Raw Power, and the one he did with Bowie. Those I heard, but for some reason, People associate that with punk rock. I mean, and looking at it, it was kind of the first kind of like raw delivery of music in a while. But like when we're in the scene, it's like it's not like we were tapping on that. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I mean, we were aware of it. I mean, it's funny because it was one of the things that was on the jukebox at CB's. You
Yeah.
know, people seldom ask me like, cause I do remember like what was on the jukebox, what we were listening to while we were there. Like that was there. A lot of Who's Driving Your Plane by the Stones, like these weird B sides and stuff like that that we listened to. The Crystals, He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss. This kind of weird stuff was on the jukebox, and that's kind of what we were influenced by. I mean,
Well, and that's probably why the bands don't sound the same, right? Because the influence is being drawn from like all over the place.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and at the same time, we would go see each other, and kind of just be I'll use the word influenced by each other. Because even if we were doing something entirely different, I mean, someone tell me the similarity between television and I don't know, the Dead Boys, or television and Blondie. Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, what's the similarity there? I mean, even though they're affiliated with the same scene. Yeah.
Well, and you think of the big five that wind up signing to Sire, yourselves, the Dead Boys, um, um,
Drones.
the Ramones, Talking Heads. This is maybe the four, right? I guess, or the big four. I guess Blondie signs to Chrysalis, right? So it's kind of a different place they wind up. But like those five bands, like there's nothing that sounds the same. Yet there's something about them where they don't feel out of place. Not just because of the fact they existed temporally together, but they don't seem out of place when you listen to them back to back to back. There's something that it's the energy that unites the whole thing, or that return to rock and roll, or that understanding of what made rock music, pop music, awesome.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, you could take it back to Little Richard even. It's like just kind of get it out there. You know what I mean?
So outside of those five bands, like who to you were some of the bands that kind of get left out of the story? Like who are some of the bands that?
The Planets. That was the first band I saw at CBGB's. I mean, because there were bands playing there before the scene started up. The Planets. They had this lead singer named Tally. Another band called the Tough Darts.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I really like the Tough Darts. I like what they were doing. I mean, um, and oh God, who else? Um, oh oh God, who would do? Oh God, I can't remember the names. Um, the Cramps. I mean, the Cramps,
Yeah.
like people know of the Cramps, but like the Cramps aren't like a national name. You know what I mean? And they were great.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess the Cramps, it almost feels like I don't know. Like I guess they feel almost out of time and place. Weirdly to me, obviously I wasn't there, so I don't really have that association with them in that place. But I feel like because I don't know. Yeah, like the Cramps, I guess just have that twang where they sound like they're like from just a swamp somewhere.
Well, they look like it too. And they're all, Brian, I remember the guitar player. They're great people. Klaus Nomi, that was another guy. There are a lot of people that kind of came along later that did like really wild things. I mean, Suicide. I mean, Suicide didn't start out at CB's. I mean, I think they were more of a Max's band.
Yeah.
But when they played, everybody went, "What's who's this guy beating up everybody with chains?"
What about the Mumps? Lance Loud's band.
Yeah, I saw them. I remember the documentary TV show about his family, whatever it's called. What was it called? American Family or something like that.
I think yeah, This American Family. It's like the first reality TV show.
Exactly, exactly. So I knew of them through through the TV show. I kind of. I mean, yeah, they were a great pop band actually. There were a couple of other pop bands. Oh, the Student Teachers. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of really great pop bands that came along as well. Um, that like once again, I mean, it's like the corporate wand. If you got signed by a big label, then everybody would know about you. But if not, regardless of what else was happening, you didn't.
And I think it also speaks to just how much great stuff was coming out then. That there's all these like bands on the periphery. Like Student Teachers were a band that I wasn't really familiar with. I think Thurston Moore, when he was on the show, talked about how big they were to him when he was
Yeah,
getting into it.
yeah.
And since then, I've gotten a bunch of the 7 inch or the two 7 inches, and they're unbelievable.
Yeah, they're great. They're really great. It's like I said, these are the bands that you would go out and you wouldn't necessarily know who was playing because it was 7 nights a week. So, you go there on a Wednesday and all of a sudden this band comes out and they're the Student Teachers and you go, wow, this is cool. You know,
So when Another World kind of first came out on Orc, was it kind of immediate that there was sort of a buzz about the record, or like did you feel there was an immediate thing, or was there already a buzz around the band before that happens?
There was a buzz around the band because Richard had left the Heartbreakers.
Yeah.
Everybody was trying to figure out
Oh,
what he.
television, right? Sorry.
No, he left the he.
Oh,
No,
Heartbreaker. Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry.
early on, it was like Neon Boys, and then I guess they were television for a second, and then Richard joined the Heartbreakers with Johnny Thunders and who was the other guy?
Jerry Nolan.
Walter Lure and Jerry Nolan. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
of course.
Jerry Nolan was one. I played with him once. He was one of the best drummers I ever played with in my life. You know, sometimes you play with a drummer, and it's like a brick wall that's got you. You know, it's just like they got you. You know what I mean? It's like it's just there. You know, and it just feels so great with them playing drums. Yeah, he was really great. So yeah, Richard had left that band, so everyone was, in the scene, so to speak, was trying to figure out what he was going to do next. You know, and what kind of band he was going to put together. So everybody was waiting to see what it was.
And so, like, when Another World comes out, it gets reissued, I guess, pretty soon after on Stiff, right? Like, I think it's within a year, or maybe it's even the same year.
Yeah, but it's pretty close. Yeah, pretty close. Yeah, the one with the razor blades. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one of my most cherished possessions is I got one of the 00001 copies. Like, I guess like the first promo copies
Oh,
were
really?
all numbered number one, and I found one when I was in LA a couple years ago.
Wow, cool, cool.
Did you get over like how much touring did you guys get to do? Like, you came up to Toronto, I think, right?
Ah, yeah. Well, I mean, it was difficult for us to tour because, I mean, Richard and Bob, and especially Richard, did not like touring. So there was a very specified thing. We go out and we do like 4 or 5 dates in the Midwest, and we come up to Toronto, and I think we didn't even do Ontario. I mean, we no, we did Toronto. Yeah, I mean, we just come to Toronto, and then there's one scene where we're coming up, and the immigration officer asked Richard, "Do you have any drugs?" And Richard goes, "No, we did them all." And I'd already been to England, so I knew like you don't do stuff like that. It's like 5 hours later, we got all of our stuff spread all over the hill. Like, Richard, what's wrong with you, man? And you're like, I love playing Toronto. I've always loved playing Toronto. I love playing Canada. I really do.
It feels like there was like a affinity between the two scenes. Like, obviously Toronto being the sort of like little brother scene to New York at the time in a lot of ways, but like Ramones playing their first kind of out of town show up here, and as you're saying, yourselves coming up here, it feels like there was a bit of a pipeline between the two cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
How long did it take before the New York thing started to change a little bit? Because, like you're saying, at first it seems very small and kind of insular, but at a certain point, all these bands start popping off a little bit.
Well, when all the records started coming out, and then all of a sudden there's police lines in front of CBGBs, I mean, and there's a lot of people that lined up down the block, and that brought a different element, rather than just I mean, you can't keep a secret forever. Rather than just musicians and the local village people coming to see bands, it was people from all over the tri-state area, So I mean, that's what I mean. To answer your question, that was, I mean, probably a year and a half after everything kind of first started there. I mean, when we first released our first Orc single, so maybe a year after that. Um, that's when things started to really kind of pop over the top. And Macy's announced their punk rock line of clothing with safety pins in them.
What were your thoughts when I guess like Blank Generation is such like a phenomenal LP. Like, it's like one of the greatest sort of debut albums of all time. And once again, to go back to that sort of like opening class, Dead Boys excluded this time because the second LP is not so hot. But like, you're like the one group that doesn't even get a chance at the second LP. Like, how long after Blank Generation comes out do you realize that you guys probably aren't going to be around to do another record?
Probably about a year-ish or so, because I mean the relationship with the record company was just you know going down the toilet fast. Only because when Richard didn't like the music business, and so we spent the time, like I said, touring parts of the Midwest, and we went and we did 2 tours of Europe. So I mean, we're doing that, but as far as making another record, they weren't really interested in our next record. Jake Riviera, Elvis Costello's manager, came and paid for some sessions, so that we could have some demos and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, Richard didn't want to promote it. I mean, he just didn't get on with Seymour, because everybody else was really hungry, and Richard didn't view the music industry like that.
Mhm. It's funny too because all those bands obviously wind up doing having huge careers. Like the especially the other ones on Sire. Um, but there's this sort of yeah, there's like what could have been a little bit because that like obviously you're all geniuses at what you do and that shows through on all the other projects and all the other stuff you kind of work on throughout your careers. But there's this sort of like what would have that second LP like been like if it actually had come out?
Well, I mean, to that, I have to say, a lot of that band to me was chemistry between the four of us. I mean, just it made it all work. I mean, when Richard played the bass line to "You Gotta Lose," I looked over at him and thought, "What? Why? What?" you know. But it works so great. And where I'm going with this is like when Mark left the band, to me the band was over.
Okay.
That thing wasn't there. That that made it happen between the four of us.
So there's no overlap between the Outsets and the Voidoids.
No, no, no. I mean, when I realized that the band was over, I mean, I just kind of um, called some friends and got together and started a band.
Um, so I guess also around that time, the Bad Brains kind of moved to New York too.
Yeah,
Well, I guess 1980, right? Like when the Outsets are kind of forming.
exactly.
Do you remember the first time you saw HR again and the Bad Brains when they got arrived?
Very well, because once again, it was a Tuesday night at CB's, like nobody there, and I thought, let me go see what's happening, who's playing. And I walk in, and all of a sudden, there's this band up on stage, just playing this lightning fast, like precise, like crazy music. And I look at, wait, I know that guy. That's Paul, or as we know him, or HR. And I knew the guitar. All the guys were from Central High, pretty much. I know all those guys, and now they're playing CBGB. So yeah, so I remember the first time, and they blew me away. So how great they were. I mean, they were really great. I mean, just I mean, as you know, it's like live. They were just like amazing. I bought their single "Pay to Come." You know,
That's awesome. So I guess yeah, paid to, so it must have been like 79. Were they still in the suits at that point on stage? Do you remember? I only know this because there's like my favorite video on YouTube that I've watched like 12,000 times is this one of them playing in 1979 in CBGB's all in suits. And it's like, it's amazing. Like, it's just like,
yeah,
like to have been there live.
I think they were wearing suits. I think they were wearing suits. I hadn't thought about that in years, but I think they were. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's awesome. That's fantastic. That's so sick.
And it was really great though. Like there's a guy from high school, and I mean, like I said, what really impressed me was how great they were. I mean, just as a band, I went, "Whoa, this is like this wakes you up on a Tuesday night. It's really great."
uh, so who did the Outsets play with? Like, were you guys playing CBGB shows or was there like sort of a different scene at that point?
Um, we were doing East Coast dates. So we'd play CBs, Maxes, the usual back and forth thing like that. I mean, and it was weird because I was like writing like songs, and we're talking about 80, 81, something like that, I think. And the whole scene was changing into this kind of funk thing, like kind of James Chance and Bush Tetras and stuff like that. So we found out it was weird. We found ourselves playing, and then like when we would play, everybody would move back from the stage, and also the disco started to hire us as well because they were late, but they heard about this thing at CBC. Thought, oh, let's get these guys over here and play with us, and they give us like a couple. Some money, a couple grand, which we thought was great at the time, but the audience just didn't know what to make of it.
Yeah, you mentioned James Chance and Bush Tetris. I guess there's also kind of that. Well, there's that 99 record scene, but there's also that. It seems like prior to that no wave scene that
Yeah.
kind of popped up. Were you going to a lot of those shows at that time, or were you aware of that stuff, or you still kind of focused more on Richard Hell and
No, no.
Voidoids?
I mean, but this is about the time that I mean, we're talking. I mean, the last show we did with Richard. I mean, Richard. It was '79. I mean, when we opened for Elvis, and I think we might have done a couple more after that. But I'm curious. I'm still curious. I'm always I have my ear to the ground to see what's going on. So yeah, when I heard about James Chance and James White and the Blacks and the Tetras and all those bands, I was really curious about them, and I thought they were great. I thought the Tetras were really great, and Chance was great too.
What about that new wave of younger bands that were coming around that time? Bands like the Stimulators, the Mad, sort of that almost the proto hardcore stuff that the Bad Brains would, I guess, help usher in.
Yeah, I didn't like the Circle Jerks and people like that. You mean?
Well, the Circle Jerks is certainly when they would come on tour from the West Coast, but I guess there's that band, the Mad, where Screaming Mad George, the lead singer, who ultimately became a special effects artist that did the Reanimator. He would like give himself abortions on stage or stab himself, amputate his arm, famously on stage. All special effects done, obviously. And then the Stimulators, which featured Harley Flanagan from the Cro-Mags on drums when he was like 14 years old, and like this sort of post-student teachers wave of the next generation of kids.
Yeah, I was out of town for a lot of that, because I think by then I was playing with Shriekback. Um, yeah, so I was a lot out of town for a lot of that. I heard it, I heard of it, but I wasn't able to actually see it.
Like, did you see any of those like kind of bands that would have been playing with the Bad Brains shortly thereafter? Like, because I guess I'm trying to get at, there's like a sort of a cultural shift that happens again when some of these younger bands come in, I guess a few years later, where the scene apparently gets a little hairier, a little more violent, and that kind of is something that progresses throughout the 80s into the 90s in hardcore and
If
punk.
I'm not mistaken, a lot of that happened at the daytime shows.
Yeah, the matinees.
Matinees, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I would walk by there and I'd see a bunch of gnarly 14-year-olds. I just went, I'm good.
Well, one band I got to ask you about because I love this album so very much ever since I bought it is that Yankees LP, the Yankees thing that you played on. What was the deal with that band? Because it's like kind of like a murderer's row of power pop and punk people that are involved in that thing, and there's some unbelievable songs on it.
Yeah, I mean, John Tiven was behind that, and actually, Richard and I were living together, and John called to have Richard play bass on the album. So I said, Richard, you want to play bass on the album? He goes, no. I said, okay, John, I'll come up. I'll play bass on your album. So that's how the whole thing started. I just just went up and played bass on the Yankees album in Connecticut somewhere.
Did you ever play with Roger C. Real, who I guess also plays bass on that record, and the Rue Morgue? G. Smith from Saturday Night Live was a guitar player in that band. They were on the same label.
No, 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 never, no.
Okay. Yeah, it's I love that Yankees record. There's some really great songs on it, and it's like it always blew my mind that I'm like, why are they sticking you on bass? Like you're one of the greatest guitar players ever, and here you are on
Well,
bass on this thing.
I've taken a couple gigs like that where I played like saxophone on people's records. I mean, I'm if I'm capable and if they're willing to let me do it, if they're that crazy.
Uh, can you talk a little bit about your experience with doing the Clash record? Like, as you said, you met Topper years ago before that. Like, and I guess you had, as you said, also toured with the Clash by that point a little bit, right?
Yeah, because they heard Blank Generation, and then they decided they wanted to have us on open for them on a tour. Um, so yeah, I mean, and so we of course became friends then, but the the call up thing that was them just coming to New York, and Mick called me up and says, "Hey, we're in New York. We're camped out at Electric Light. Come by and say hello." So I went over there and just to say hello, and then they start jamming on this thing, and I said, "Joe, give me your guitar." Joe gives me his guitar. Joe's over on grand piano. Um, Mikey Dredd was there. I don't. Paul wasn't there anywhere. Paul Simon. I don't remember him being there. And we started jamming on this thing. I mean, and it was like in another song that I think that became Ivan Meets GI Joe as well. And it was just me coming by and saying hello. And then 6 months later, Mick calls me up and says, "You got to come get your check." I'm like, "For what?" He goes, "Well, they turned that into a single." I'm like, "Whoa, really? Thanks." Really, thanks, Mick, because otherwise that check would still be sitting there. Columbia's not going to call me.
No. And whoever owns them now, Sony, I guess it'd fall on their shoulders to give you that call.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really not going to happen.
Yeah, no, not at all. You also play on that Sandra Bernhard live record, I guess, with "Without You I'm Nothing," right? You're on that thing.
Yeah, that came about because how can I? Well, I'm just going to say it. I was touring with Freakback, and my wife at the time goes, "Look, you're gone like 11 months out of the year, and like either you do something in town or that's it." So luckily, Sandra had this live show called "Without You I'm Nothing" at the Orpheum Theater on Second Avenue. That was a couple blocks to my house, and through friends, it was arranged that I be the guitar player in her band, and her band was like on stage. It wasn't in the pit. It was like we interacted with her and everything. And I got to say, it was one of the best times I ever had playing with somebody because she was nuts. You know, she was fun and nuts. You know, I mean, you just never know what was going to happen on stage with her. You know, so yeah. So then they decided to make a live record, and that's where that came from.
That must have been a crazy time too, because that's sort of like, the sort of like her ascent, like, and like there was like such a seeming a rabid fandom around her at that time, and like such a cultural moment.
Well, it was weird because yeah, I've worked in theater a couple times. I mean, and it's really of course it's all money driven, and I mean people want to make their money back, the investors and stuff like that. The first month or so, the attendance was okay, but then the magic wand happened, which was the David Letterman show, and then it was booked for the next 5 months
Yeah.
because once the people see that, they want to be associated with it and all that. But yeah, I mean, and she was hanging out with Madonna, all this other stuff was going on. Mary Tyler Moore came back. Remember, who Mary Tyler Moore is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I never forget. She came backstage, and all these like kind of Hollywood types were coming backstage all the time. And I thought, oh, she's going back to see Sandra. And she comes back and she like hugs the sax player and gives him a big hug because she'd known him from somewhere. I thought that was so cool. Um,
Sorry, when you mentioned Madonna coming backstage, did you ever play with the Breakfast Club or see her old band? They were like apparently a late era CB's band too.
yeah, no, I never, I knew Madonna. I mean, but I never played in her band. No, no,
No, I didn't mean playing it. Did you ever see them or something? Sorry.
yeah, I did actually at Max's. I think. I think she played Max's once.
Yeah,
And
I think yeah.
I mean, or maybe more than once, but maybe yeah. She played Max's, and that's when I realized um, she doesn't belong here. She's going to be somewhere else, because her whole thing was kind of like already staged up. She already had it thought out.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see those people that have that second gear where they're going to go places. And I guess like you've been around a lot of these people that wind up becoming pop stars. Like, did you see it in the Talking Heads? Like, could you tell like, oh man, the Talking Heads are going to have this career? 'Cause to me, they always seemed like they were like an outlier, glitch in the matrix type thing, where the most unlikely kind of pop stars.
Absolutely. I mean, the Talking Heads were from the downtown art scene and used to play this place called the Ocean Club. Hilly would not let them play at CBGB's. So all the people around him were whispering in his ear, like, you got to have this band come play. They're really great. He's like, nah, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So then he had them there, I think, on a really off night one night, and like people went crazy. And then that's when he started booking the Talking Heads, you know, at CB's. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I mean, but then again, I saw something in them though, because Psycho Killer, when I heard them do that song, I thought, okay, they're able to touch on something here, I mean, and like people are relating to them, so yeah, I could do that.
It's interesting you bring it up there that they're like sort of this art band versus like a band like the Dictators, where there's almost like this double helix in punk of art meets street rock and roll, and somewhere in the middle is where punk happens. And I find that's like very much like almost reflected in the guitars in the Voidoids as well. Like there's sort of this like two style conflict that's coming together in the band that kind of like works.
Yeah, very true, very true. Bob and I were coming from entirely different places, and we had a method to it as well. We always said we would never play at the same part of the neck at the same time. You would never find us both playing the same chord. So if one was doing one thing, the other one was doing other. And the other strange thing is, like, as the band progressed, we started to sound more and more like each other. It was kind of strange, like some bizarre married couple or something, finishing each other's sentences. But yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it was. And that describes the whole scene as well. It's like like kind of like, yeah, these things joining, clashing in the middle, thus making a third entity, kind of.
I guess it's in Please Kill Me. They talk about a fight that happens where Handsome Dick Manitoba gets, I guess, attacks Jane County on stage, and there's sort of like a division that happens within the early CB scene a little bit. Were you kind of like already on the journey of the Voidoids at that point, or was that something you remember happening?
I used to like to see. I mean, I wasn't privy to that, you know. I mean, I would go see both bands. I'd go see, Jane or Wayne County, and I'd go see the Dictators. I thought the Dictators were funny. I thought anybody that called himself Handsome Dick Manitoba deserved some attention from someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was always there was that. I mean, so that's the whole thing. Is like there was that rivalry between the provincials, the locals, that a lot of us that had moved here were unaware of, So that was one of them. I mean, the whole thing between Handsome Dick and Jane County, and I mean, and Lydia Lunch and Handsome Dick as well. It's like, yeah, these kind of things, you know.
Lydia Lunch is someone who, she's a former guest of the podcast, but also someone that has come up as being someone that struck a lot of fear into Thurston Moore's heart as a young person. And Kid Congo Powers talked about how intimidating she was. Do you remember the first time you met her or seeing any of her groups early on?
I don't know about how scary she was on stage, but in persona, yeah, she scared me too. This kind of person you just knew that she was capable of a lot of things, and you didn't know when it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, and she would just say these things to you that were just outrageous. Like how come you don't want to fuck me? It's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, there's really no right answer to that question.
Exactly.
There's so much more for me to talk to you about. So at this point, I'm going to move to sort of a lightning round of questions. But before that, I would love to extend you the offer that anytime you want to come back on this podcast for whatever reason, the door is always open.
I like doing this kind of shows. It makes me feel like I've matured or something.
Well, we're still in the 80s of your career, so do not worry. There's lots of maturing for us to do on this podcast in future episodes.
Right.
But I wanted to know what it was like working with Matthew Sweet and how you kind of got involved with him, and like were you aware of him prior to getting in the group?
Kind of aware, not really. I heard his name. I mean, there were so many singer-songwriters out about that time in the 90s. And Quine had played on the record, and they asked Quine to come tour. Now, I know Bob very well. That's not a question you ask him. The answer is no, So Quine said, you should ask Ivan to do it. So, Quine suggested that I go on tour. So I met Matthew, and he played me the record. He played me the Girlfriend record, and then I was with him for 6 years after that. And I liked him. I like his approach to pop. I thought it was great. And because his formula, I can't really, speak for him, but his formula is kind of like he writes these pristine, great pop songs, right? And then he hires people like Quine or Lloyd and myself to come and just like screw the whole thing up, and it works for him. It's great.
Well, I don't know. I would kind of push back on that a little bit because, like, I think you guys are like some of the guitar players that do give lead singers and lyricists like space to kind of do their thing. Like, it's never an overbearing guitar.
Oh no, that's not what I meant. But I mean just our approach.
Yeah, yeah.
It's something that you would hear on Soft Music 101 or something.
Well, that's the genius that I think Jennifer from Royal Truck said when she was on the show. It's like you want to write the great pop song and then just bury it in enough stuff that only the real people can kind of hear it.
That's really a great quote. Yeah, exactly.
Going back to joining Matthew Sweet and being in the group, it's kind of amazing. Like, you've constantly been around, and obviously you're an incredible songwriter yourself, but like sort of these genius pop songwriters, like Tommy Keene and then Matthew Sweet as well. Like sort of these, I don't know, and also like with the Outsets too, there's like more of a power pop kind of vibe to it. Were you always like a fan of that sound, like Raspberries and the Nerves and that kind of world? Blondie, I guess too.
Yeah. I love great pop music. I really do. I mean, yeah. I have a few guilty pleasures. I don't even know if I can tell you on this show.
There's no guilt here. We're talking about a genre that people call a novelty genre, and I've done like 500 episodes about it. There's no guilt. One band that no one should have any guilt in liking, that's for sure, or one artist I should say, is Sonny Vincent. I'm a huge Testers fan, and I know you've done some work with Sonny Vincent. Did you guys play with the Testers, or were you a fan of them back in the day?
I saw them a couple. They were more of a Max's bands, as I said, so I saw them a couple times. Yeah, and I liked them, but I didn't hook up with Sonny until decades later.
Yeah.
And when we were over in Europe. But yeah, I knew of the band, back in the day because I think I saw them at Max's once or twice. Yeah.
I love. Well, I'm a huge fan of all his music, like the whole way through. The records you do, obviously later on, but all that early stuff, the Testers. And to me, he's like a true journeyman punk musician. Like, and he comes up time and time again. I'll talk to like Grant from Husker Du, who played with him, or the Rock from the Crypt guys did stuff with him later on. Like, he's someone that never got that chance to kind of like quote unquote make it in any sort of way, but like has been kind of a part of this thing the whole way through, and really like a kind of driver.
No, it's true. I mean, he's much more appreciated in Europe.
Yeah.
You know, he's constantly playing it over there and releasing records as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of his singles, I think, sort of the '90s on, start mainly coming out from Europe.
Hmm.
A lot of his records. Another group that I'm a huge fan of, incredible singles, Hunks and his Punks.
Yay.
Do you have any stories about working with Hunks and his Punks?
Um, First of all, I was really impressed with them. I'm impressed with their whole idea. You know, what I mean, the whole thing of like, this openly gay lead singer with a band full of women that play really well and sing really well, and he's singing kind of Shangri-La type love songs. When it fell into my lap as a producer, I went, "Oh, this is great. I'm gonna have some fun with this," you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were just great. I mean, they all sang really great. Actually, a couple of them I use on my latest record. Aaron Emsley, that was the drummer in the band, is also a great singer as well. So yeah, I mean, and Hunks he's just Hunks. I'm not sure what he's up to now, but yeah, he's a wild guy.
And I guess a guy who I thought was much wilder until I finally got to meet him. But John Spencer, you did a lot of like the Heavy Trash records you did, and then I think you did something with John and Christina as well. Like I'm a huge fan of his stuff, and someone who seemed to kind of like in the '90s, carry on that punk ethos in a way, in like a different space.
Yeah. Well, John's a perfect case of still waters run deep, you
Yeah,
know, and way deep, And
yeah.
I love working with him. He's the kind of guy, he knows exactly what he wants, but also he'll come into your studio and he'll pick the one thing to use that doesn't work. It's like, I knew this was going to happen.
And also a Maryland, DC area musician as well,
Who's that?
John Spencer.
I never knew that. I thought he was
Yeah,
from Connecticut or something. You're probably right. I never knew that.
he might have been born in Connecticut, but the Pussy Galore thing all starts in DC.
True. Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's once again there's this sort of like you're talking about, like from a place that really had nothing going on,
Mhm.
musically, like go-go kind of being its own thing as well, but like punk seems to open the door for all this incredible stuff that kind of comes out and continues to come out of that city. Like the biggest band in punk and hardcore today, Turnstiles, from the same area.
Yeah.
It's a DC's got it.
It's got it. There's a lot of impetus there, a lot of need for cathartic release.
And also John Spencer, like yourself and myself, former Matador recording artist.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're all family.
Yeah.
Uh, this has been amazing. And anytime you want to come back on and talk about any of this stuff, or talk about any of the things we didn't cover, like Gang of Four and all sorts of things, you're always welcome.
Why, thank you very much, Damian. Thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Ivan, for coming on the show. And you're right there. Anytime Ivan wants to come back, the door is always open. Because how wild's that? How wild is that? I'm going to do a video about this Madonna punk band this week, too. So if you see it on social media, it'll be a little more fleshed out by the time that comes out. Check out the Turn Out a Punk Instagram page and the Turn Out a Punk TikTok page and my Instagram page. You'll see that video later on this week. All right. Talk about things you're going to be seeing later on this week. At the end of this week, I'm going to somehow edit together. It's going to be a monster editing job. A colossal Turned Out a Punk goes to the Punk Museum, a special 2-part episode with friend of the show and my good buddy, and I will say a punk expert beyond reproach, Chris Estrada, joining me And the first time it's a panel discussion at the Punk Museum with Fred Armisen and Fat Mike. And then Fat Mike came back, and Chris and I just talked to Fat Mike kind of, I guess, 2-on-1 at that point. And Fat Mike is the most controversial guest we have on this show. He's definitely the most contentious guest we have on the show, and this is no exception. He and I, we butt heads. We don't really get along. I think we admit that to each other, actually, on this one coming up. Anyway, you'll hear it in a few days now. Got to get to work. And that is that. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives and issues of Indigenous peoples all over the world matter. We need to protect trans kids and help trans people protect themselves and their rights. Stop hate and violence towards people of different faiths, different races, different nationalities, because we're not talking about politics. This is the human rights stuff. This is just basic human rights. And I would add to that, a basic human right is making sure that people have the right to choose what they want to do with their reproductive systems, because there are people all over the world that are trying to take these rights away from people right now, and it must be terrifying. And so my heart goes out to anyone who has to deal with this Nazi bullshit. And if you want to get involved and make the world a better place, I'm sure there's plenty of organizations right now that are doing good work in your community. Get involved with your time. If you can donate money, I'm sure they could use some money. You know, just it'll help you feel better to make, not that this is about you, but like to make the world better. And one day, hopefully, the world will be better. I look at kids, and I think they know so much more than we do. It's going to be better for them if the world's not too fucked up at that point when they get it. Speaking about making things better, start a band, start a fanzine, start a record label, start a book, a podcast, a webpage. Webpages were really cool. I learned a lot from webpages. Still learn from webpages. The internet now is like a ghost town for good webpages. So start a cool webpage and just create your own culture, because that's what this thing runs on, is people making their own culture. And you can contribute and make the stuff you want to see in this world. And I've seen many people do it, myself included, and it's easier than you think it is. Speaking about easy things to do, sign your organ donor cards, because by the time they come looking for those organs, it's the least of your worries, and then they will perform a miracle with them. I've seen it happen with my own eyes, and you maybe can see it too. Or maybe you wouldn't see it if you're signing your organ donor card, but you would be part of it, so you can maybe be part of a miracle too when you die. It's getting really morbid. If life gets you down and shit gets too heavy, thinking about all this morbid, heavy shit that we have to deal with, try meditating. And I swear it takes a little bit of work, but if I can do it, you definitely can do it. So try it, and it can make things a little bit better. Look into alternative forms of medication, too. If the medicine that the doctor prescribed to you does not seem to be working, there are alternative treatments. It's very, very weird when I put it like that, but I don't know. I just feel like I should be more open about the, cannabis stuff and all the other things, but that's for another day. All right. Have a great week. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.